Are you having trouble getting your writing ideas organized? I know I have. But let me tell you a secret. You can change that. Hello friends, my name is Ian and welcome back to the channel. This week we're going to be starting a 4-episode series where we talk about the 3-act story structure and how I use it to plan and write my books. Now, your 3-act story structure is what can help make up an outline. And an outline is something that allows you to keep your thoughts in one place, allows you to think about what's going to come next, and organize every other part of your story. This outline can, and in my opinion, should be based around the character and how they change throughout the story. That's because I prefer character-driven stories over plot-driven stories. In this video, we're kind of gonna just go over the 3-act story structure and get an overview of how it can be used very well. With that being said, let's get right into the video. So what is the 3-act story structure and where did it come from? A 3-act story structure is a story structure that is split into 3 parts or acts, like you would see in a play. Act 1 is known as the setup, Act 2 is known as the confrontation, and Act 3 is known as the resolution. A very popular example of this is Star Wars, but there is a reason it's used so much. It is one of, if not the most effective way to tell a story. The 3-act story structure has been around for a very long time. A lot of people attribute the discovery of the 3-act story structure to the Greek philosopher Aristotle and his work of literary theory called Poetics. Aristotle noted down things about his favorite plays and stories and what they all had in common. In his theory, it states that a story must have a beginning, middle, and end. He didn't specifically coin the term 3-act story structure in his writing. He didn't really invent it, but more so discovered the 3-act story structure. Others give credit to Sid Field, who popularized it in 1979 and his book Screenplay, The Foundation of Screenwriting. Whoever you decide to give the credit to, it still stands as very popular and very highly used. Why do I like the 3-act story structure? Well, honestly, it's very easy to use. When I first started outlining, I did my own thing, and at the end, it didn't really make much sense. So I looked around and found the 3-act story structure, which I thought might work, but I wasn't so sure. If you need structure, this is a very easy way to go about it. It prevents you from losing sight on your vision. If you don't outline and you are a pantser, if it works for you, like I said earlier, perfect. But if it doesn't work for you, then you might end up losing sight of your vision as you write without an outline. The 3-act story structure on its own keeps you on track and keeps the characters' changes on track so you can tell the exact story you want. And the last thing is that it is pretty much universally usable. You can use it in novels, you can use it in different novel genres, you can use it in plays, you can use it in movies. There is a reason it's used so much, and that's because it works. So now we're going to actually get into the structure, which I'm sure is why you clicked on the video in the first place. So like I said, this story structure is split into three acts: the setup, the confrontation, and the resolution. Act 1 takes up roughly 25% of your novel. Act 2 takes roughly 50% of your novel. And Act 3 takes roughly the last 25% of the novel. Act 1 has the beginning or the hook. It has the inciting incident, it has the build-up, and it has the first plot point. Act 2 consists of the reaction phase, the first pinch point, and the midpoint. It also includes the action phase, the second pinch point, and the second plot point. And Act 3 has the pre-climax, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. Now that you have an overview of what each of them have, let's talk a little bit about what each section I just talked about does. Act 1, or the setup. As the name of the section says, you set up everything for the rest of the novel. What happens in the first act is you take the character's normal life and you crush it. You just crush it to pieces. You want to force them out of their comfort zone so the rest of the story takes place. The beginning, or hook. You have to grab the reader's attention within the first few pages. By the end of this section, you should have introduced the character, the setting, and what their everyday life might look like. Next is the inciting incident. Probably the most fun you'll have in the first act. At least that's what I have the most fun with. The inciting incident is located roughly 6 to 12% through your novel, and most of the time is introduced within the first 2 chapters or few scenes. This is the catalyst that sends your character on their path, on their journey, and is the thing that takes your character out of their comfort zone. If you don't bring them out of their comfort zone, then they won't have a reason to go on this journey or to try and complete their goal. The build-up is when the final pieces are put into place. The tension starts to build in the aftermath of the inciting incident. The protagonist has to face these consequences that happened because of the inciting incident. The first plot point is located roughly 25% of the way through your story, as this plot point is the end of Act 1. This is the doorway between Act 1 and Act 2. The protagonist makes the choice to leave their old life behind, to try and complete this goal they got from the inciting incident. This is the point of no return. One thing I forgot to mention for the inciting incident is that it doesn't need to be huge. It could just be something that pushes the character out of their comfort zone and gives them a new goal. Act 2, confrontation. This is the most difficult act to get right. This is where most readers do not finish simply because the story turns into a grind, and not a lot of people will sit through a grind to read. All parts should have a reason to be there. They should not be there just because, as that will get boring. I would know. I've done it before. In Act 2, the protagonist is not able to complete their goal yet. They must get stronger and get more knowledge about their situation and use that to defeat the antagonistic force later. The reaction phase. The character struggles to understand the obstacles that are being thrown at them. Your protagonist pursues a way to complete their goal without getting hurt. All actions are in response to what happens to them. Every action has a reaction. For the reaction phase, I kind of like to split it into 2, where it's on each side of the pinch point, which we will be talking about next. I put one part at the beginning of Act 2 to the pinch point, and then after the pinch point to the midpoint. Now, the pinch point, which I just mentioned. The pinch point is midway through the beginning of Act 2 and the midpoint, or roughly 37% through the story. Pinch points in general serve as a reminder to the character and the reader what is at stake. New clues about the conflict also come to light. It helps prevent Act 2 from sagging too much. It reminds the readers and refocuses them on the core conflict. Next comes the midpoint, and as you can probably tell, it comes 50% through the story. It is the exact middle of the story. However, you can put it off a little. It doesn't have to be exactly 50% through, but that is traditionally where the midpoint is located. This is the moment of truth where the character learns the full extent of the conflict. It is usually a major plot twist in the story that gets your readers reinvested. This also helps with keeping Act 2 interesting. Next is the action phase. Because of the understanding of the main conflict, the protagonist begins to make some headway against the antagonist or the antagonistic force, and it allows the protagonist to approach from a different angle. The character reaches what seems to be victory, but as we all know, if you're only at this part of the story, it's not gonna happen. Just like the reaction phase, I like to split the action phase split by the second pinch point, which we'll talk about now. This pinch point sits midway through the midpoint and the end of Act 2, or roughly 67% of the way through. It splits the action phase down the middle and serves as another reminder about what's at stake and the antagonistic power. This antagonist grows closer and continues to grow more powerful. And now the second plot point, the end of Act 2, which is roughly 75% of the way through. After reaching their seeming victory, they're crushed. They are just simply and utterly crushed. This is the largest reversal and defeat that character has suffered. It is a very dark moment for them and the story. Make sure that it's meaningful to the character. And now we are on to Act 3, or the resolution. This is the final point in the novel where the conflict reaches its breaking point. This is the point in the story where the main tension reaches its snapping point. All plots and subplots must be wrapped up by the end of Act 3. First comes the pre-climax. The protagonist reels and questions themselves and their choices they made after their failure. They question their commitment and their will to keep going. They don't feel worthy. However, this turns around and it leads right into the climax. This is the final showdown, the main event. This is what the entire book story has been leading up to. The protagonist faces their biggest challenge yet and must defeat the antagonistic force or lose everything. Protagonist defeats the antagonist and finally reaches their goal. And now you reach the falling action, and you want to lead them into the final stage of your book, which is the end and resolution. This is the end of your story. Here, you're going to want to wrap up any loose ends that may still be hanging around. The falling action and the resolution often happen in only 1 to 2 chapters combined, but you can change that a little if it makes sense to. You're only going to want 1 or 2 chapters of the falling action and the resolution. Now that we're done with that, do you actually have to use the 3-act story structure? No, absolutely not. You can use whatever you want. You can even, like I keep saying, pantser it, if that's what's comfortable for you. That is the great part about this. You don't have to use any of the tools that are given to you if you don't want to. Before you start outlining, make sure you know your character. Think about where they'll start and where they will end up. What is their character arc? How do they change? What events will help change your character and complete their character arc throughout the middle of the story. What changes about their morals, their relationships, their internal feelings. You want to think about all of this, and you also want to think about how a character will react to certain situations. Please, 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 no matter what, leave some wiggle room. Do not write it as if it's a draft. Take your basic idea of it, expand upon it a little bit, and then after you expand on it, leave it there, and then write your first draft. Your outline is your zero draft. You get the basic idea, it is your foundation. It is ugly, it is not pretty, and that's fine. If you are a person who needs to know every single tiniest little detail throughout the story, then go at it as much as you want. Maybe it'll work better for you if you don't leave any wiggle room. And again, that's fine. You can adjust your story structure. However, for my experience, I outline a lot, but change inevitably comes. I do leave a little bit of wiggle room in my outlines. That's about all I have for you today. Are you using the 3-act story structure, or are you using something else? I hope you enjoyed and found this video informative. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you have not already, as I post videos like this every Sunday. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you next week. As always, never stop writing. Bye!